This is Homeschool 101, a collaboration between ABS Television and the Ministry of Education. Stay attentive and attempt all activities. And now, today's lesson.
Good day. Welcome to Homeschool 101. I am Ms. Farah Williams, a lecturer at the Antigua State College. Today we're continuing with Unit 1 of Tourism for Cape. And the topic we're looking at is the impacts of the tourism industry. So before we get into the lesson, I want you to just take a minute and state what is the profession of your parents or yourself. Maybe you're working. Okay, so what's your profession? What's the profession of your parents? And state 3 ways in which tourism has affected your lives. Okay, whether a positive way or a negative way. Okay, so if your answer was employment, as in you were employed within the tourism sector, or you're a business owner, your parents are business owners, or it has just made your life better overall, okay, then tourism has impacted you in a positive way, in a great way, okay? So this feeds into what we're going to be looking at today. So at the end of the session, you'll be able to highlight the 8 sectors of the tourism industry, and we're going to be looking at the sociocultural, the environmental, and the economic impacts of the industry within the destination. So there are 8 key sectors of tourism. The first one, or one of the sectors, is accommodations. So in the different types of accommodations, which you would have looked at earlier on in the term, so hotels, eco-lodges, or bed and breakfast. There are various other types of accommodations, but we're just listing these 3 as an example. Transportation, whether air, sea, or by land. So Virgin Atlantic or American Airlines, sea cruise ships, or land transport, so if you're a taxi driver, and so on. Attractions, whether man-made or natural. Travel trade or intermediaries, an example is travel agencies, so booking functions for travelers, potential travelers coming to or traveling to destinations. Events and conferences, so carnival or cricket would fall under here, as well as the business sector or business clients who would be traveling for conferences and so on. Food and beverage, and under food and beverage you have restaurants and bars, catering, and so on. Tourism services, so you have retail, tourism ministries, tourism suppliers. So any services that would aid the tourism industry would fall under this sector. And adventure tourism and recreation. So ecotourism, yachting, recreation facilities. Okay, so now we move into the sociocultural impacts. So some positive sociocultural impacts includes just an overall improve of your lifestyle. Because money is coming into the country, we're able to work, we're able to spend, we're able to buy things, eat better, live better, generally. Exchange of cultural information, ideas, and beliefs. So in interaction with the tourists, persons coming in, we are able to have a look into what their lives are like, as well as them looking into and experiencing our cultures, our way of life. Strengthening community pride. So because we're on showcase, we're showing our culture, we're showing our landmarks and so on, our history, we're able to appreciate what we have more. Increasing community entrepreneurial opportunities, So let's say a hotel pops up in your village there's an opportunity for you to open, let's say, a bar or some sort of activity within that proximity, okay? The rehabilitation of existing buildings and historical sites, and the transformation of old buildings into new ones. Okay, so it gives the government or the community or even another entrepreneurial opportunity for some old buildings. Maybe there is an old building with historical significance that is there that's not being used. The government can turn that into an attraction, right? Maybe there's a hiking trail that's within your community. You have the Wallens Nature Trail, and that's owned by a local person from the Old Road community. So they were able to take part in that opportunity and turn it into a business for them. So let's look at the negative sociocultural impacts. So development of social problems. We have an example would be increase in robberies, drug use, and drug trade, and even prostitution. So perhaps we had a peaceful community, and now there is a hotel in the area. There are tourists around, walking around the community. They would have brought their habits, their addictions, and so on to that country. So they're there, they're looking to buy drugs, and so, you know, once there is a demand, there's going to be a supply. Okay, so that the drug trade would be on an increase in that community, and by extension, the destination. Okay, when we look at the demonstration effect, that would cause some of the robberies that are occurring. So you see a tourist traveling with a nice handbag, a nice fancy phone, and you don't have one. So that can cause envy and so on, and that would lead to some robberies, which we have some instances of that happening in Antigua. Prostitution, persons come here with the idea that, you know, the Caribbean is hypersexualized, you know. So it's a perception for when you come here, you're gonna meet someone and then you're gonna engage in, you know, sexual activity and so on. There's something about the black male that is exotic to the more modern countries, okay? And by extension, the Caribbean, because they see us as, I guess they look at our carnival videos and they see how we are, and they come with their own fantasies about us. Displacement of locals, it's another example. So let's say your parents used to have, you know, we sell tray here, you know, we sell a little sweetie tray. We sell stuff on the side of the road. We play our trade anywhere, basically. So now there's a hotel or there's some sort of tourism business. You're going to be forced to move. You can't operate there anymore because there's a hotel. So you're displaced. You're put out of place. Okay? The natives face with impossible barriers, preventing them from grasping economic opportunities produced by tourism development. So for example, lack of financing for startup and also incentives. So if you're a really poor society, then how exactly would you be able to take part in tourism as an entrepreneur? Okay, there is no financing for you, especially if the government did not set that up. Okay, so these things happen without a real plan for the tourism sector. And as I mentioned before, the demonstration effect. So local residents' adaptation of the tourist consumption and spending behaviors. This can lead to jealousy, resentment, and even hatred of the tourists when locals realize they are unable to achieve such lifestyles. It can also lead to loss of culture. So you see persons coming in, you see the way they dress, you see the way they eat, the things that they have, and you want to change that. Okay, so you want to do as they are doing. So perhaps before we liked our ground provision, or you like your ground provision, and then there's tourists here, you're working at the hotel, you see what they're eating, and you don't want ground provision anymore. You want pasta and things that's American food or European food. Okay, so it can lead to loss of culture. So economic impacts. All right, so now we move on to economic impacts. So direct economic impacts refers to the actual money spent by incoming tourists during their stay. The expenditure is just distributed mainly to hotels or other places of accommodation, transport, restaurants and bars, local souvenir shops, and other places where tourists are prone to spend their money. Okay, so direct economic impacts. So the money that the tourists would actually spend directly encountered with a tourism business. So apart from economic impacts, tourist expenditure also causes indirect and induced effects. So for indirect economic impacts are expenditures that goes to the payment of local wages. Oh my, let's start from the top. So apart from direct economic impacts, tourist expenditure also causes indirect and induced effects. Indirect economic impacts are expenditure that goes to the payment of wages of local employees and to suppliers of goods and services in demand from beneficiaries of direct economic impacts. Okay, so it's just basically saying indirectly, when a guest comes to the country, when they would have stayed at the hotel, they pay directly into the hotel. The hotel then pays their workers. Okay, so that is indirect economic impacts. The hotels would then also pay the suppliers of goods and services. So your farmers, persons who come to the hotel to provide entertainment, bands and so on. Okay. Induced economic impacts are tied to increase in spending among local employees due to higher wages caused by an influx of tourism expenditure. So after you would have gotten paid from the hotel, now that you would have gone home or gone to the supermarket and spend to provide for your family. So you're buying food, you're buying clothes, you're buying cars. So that is induced economic impacts. The induced impacts are generated as wages are spent within the state's economy. So for example, hotels and employees supported directly or indirectly by tourism spend their income in local region for housing, food, clothes, transportation, and the usual array of household products and service needs. So a simple tourism impact scenario illustrates, let's say a region attracts an additional 100 tourists, each spending $100 per day. That's $10,000 in new spending per day in that area alone. If sustained over a 100-day season, the region should accumulate $1 million in new sales. The $1 million in spending would be distributed to lodging, restaurants, amusements, and retail trade sectors in proportion to how the visitor spends the $100. Okay, so this basically gives you a general idea as to how the tourist dollar is distributed in the local economy. All right, so generally some positive economic impacts include increased domestic income and foreign exchange currency, because as you know, we do need foreign exchange so that we can trade. Economic multiplier effect. So when the tourist spends $1 here, it multiplies or it trickles down into the economy. Increased employment, so as more tourism businesses are opened, more persons are hired. Improved infrastructure. So as tourism becomes more popular, as more businesses open, you have to build roads, you have to improve the water systems, and so on. And better internet, as everybody loves, has been waiting for. So some negative economic impacts include leakages of expenditures out of the local economy. So when tourism earnings are spent on imported goods rather than locally produced and supplied goods. Also, when hotels are owned by multinational corporations, the profits are sent back to the parent company located in another country. So we all know that importation is a big issue here. That's where we lose a lot of our money, okay? Increased propensities, that is to import. So high importation of goods to satisfy the tourist taste. Okay, so not only do they have to import because we cannot supply the entire tourism industry with all of the goods that they need, tourists have specific tastes that the hotels and the food and beverage establishments have to provide for. Okay, sometimes persons are allergic to certain things, so, and we don't produce here, we don't have a manufacturing industry here, so we do have to import. Also, there are different types of tourists who prefer something that is familiar from back home. So the hotels and the food and beverage establishments would have to provide for that need. Opportunity cost is another negative effect. The cost of foregoing one alternative investment in or spend on another, for example, capital investment in tourism rather than agriculture. So that is something that's an ongoing conversation here. Tourism is the main revenue earner for most of the Caribbean islands. We're heavily dependent on tourism. So the government would invest more into tourism rather than agriculture. Okay, and that's a debate because we're saying, okay, we depend so much on tourism, what happens to the other? Like we're putting all our eggs in one basket, what happens to the other industries that need development? Seasonal unemployment. So high visitation and tourism activities during certain periods of the year. So for example, you have our peak period from November to April, and then after that, some hotels close, and then you're out of a job for the next 6 months or so. Come back to our point, overdependence of tourism. So when most income, jobs, etc. are generated by the tourism industry, instead of being spread across several industries, okay? So that's, I think our government is now seeing the importance of investing in agriculture and possibly, hopefully, other alternative industries so that we are not so heavily affected by world occurrences, things that are happening in the world. So COVID-19, and we had the US downturn before, okay? Right, so for example, COVID-19. Another negative impact, inflation and higher land values. So the increase in prices of regular goods and services because of tourism activities. Tourism development also increased the land values. So if your community has hotels or other tourism businesses, you would find that purchasing land within and around that area is going to be very expensive. I don't know if you've ever noticed how expensive things at the airport is as opposed to buying it in town. So a bottle of water can cost $5 at the airport as opposed to the $3 or sometimes $2 you can spend in town. All right, so we move on to environmental impacts. Some positive environmental impacts include the protection of local environments. So due to the increase of income from tourism, the government is able to preserve these different environments. So preservation of our natural resources, like rivers, beaches, forests, restoration of historical buildings and sites. So like Friars Beach has a bathroom, so they're able to put down certain infrastructure on the beaches and keep it clean because tourists will be coming here. Protection of wildlife in various locations, tourism, discouraging poaching because it places economic value on wildlife and protection of natural resources. Okay, so because you know that you can make some money from the wildlife, we don't have wildlife here, but in Kenya and Tanzania, it places some economic value, so they are forced to protect these wildlife. Conservation of historic buildings. Tourism can provide a driving force for converting old historic buildings and areas into the focus for tourism activity. So for example, Brimstone Hill in St. Kitts and historic Bridgetown and the Garrison in Barbados. Environmental awareness and community involvement. So tourism has the potential to increase public appreciation for the environment and to spread awareness of environmental problems when it brings people closer in contact with nature and the environment. So we have a campaign, Clean is Cool, and there was an ad running informing people to keep Antigua clean. You know, for the tourism is everybody's business, so you need to keep Antigua clean, do not litter and so on, clean up the beach. All these different campaigns are bringing awareness to our environment. Because I'm sure before that, persons would just litter, drop things all over the place. But now that you're making them realize, look, tourism is our main industry, and we have to keep our environment clean for the persons who are coming here, then persons will be thinking, okay, you know what, that is true. It would have been nice that we would have been doing it for ourselves because we want to see our environment and our surroundings clean. But hey, once it gets the job done. But I think from that, it brings a new awareness to at least the new generation to be more environmentally conscious and so on. Even the new types of tourists who are traveling are very environmentally aware. They do not want to come to a destination that is dirty. And so on. Some negative environmental impacts: pollution, air, noise, water. Okay, so air would be from, you know, smoke from the vehicles and from the airplanes and so on, air pollution. And noise would be from carnival or whatever activities are happening in the area that is just making a ton of noise. So if you're located, if you live close to town during carnival time, you know about noise pollution, okay? And water pollution from the cruise ships and so on. Erosion of beaches and soil, okay? So from the hiking trails, from cutting down trees, to develop tourism businesses, can cause soil erosion. It can also cause a loss of natural habitats due to deforestation, trekking, and development. So these are basically interconnected. So yes, we do see an opportunity to develop tourism, but once it's not done properly with a proper environmental impact assessment, then you would see these negative impacts increased. Climate change effects as a result of emissions from air and ground transport. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Overcrowding and traffic congestion when the volume of tourists exceeds the capacity of the environment. So Carnival is a great example of overcrowding. Carnival and Sailing Week. I'm sure you've tried to get to English Harbour during one of the activities at Sailing Week and the traffic is backed all the way up. Okay, imagine that you live in that area and you're trying to get home and you can't because the traffic is so tight. Persons are parked on your lawn, persons are peeing on your lawn, persons are littering and so on. So that's a real negative effect. Poor waste management by tourism and tourism-related development. I must say now, tourism businesses are more environmentally aware. They are more sustainable, so they have recycling mechanisms in place. Well, at least for large hotels and so on. I guess we would have to do an assessment to see if the smaller tourism businesses are recycling and conserving, and exposing of waste in the proper way. Okay, so in closing, I am leaving you with an activity for you to do at home, and what I want you to do is to put some local examples under each section. So you have economic impacts, environmental impacts, and economic, based on what you would have seen or experienced during your daily lives. You can put some, about 4 examples, local specific examples to your experience and to your knowledge under these headings. Okay, so thank you for tuning in again and have a good day and happy studying.
You've been watching Homeschool 101, a partnership between ABS Television and the Ministry of Education. Thank you for viewing this lesson. Join us again next time.